looking very ready for the weather. That is a very pretty sweater. Lily, I think you look really great. That is a beautiful sweater, and it goes so well with your complexion. Happy Friday, Baylor College of Medicine and friends of Baylor. So my sister asked me, why is this measles happening? Why is this going on now? And so I thought I would remind everyone that measles is one of the most infectious diseases. There is probably the most infectious disease. And we've talked about the R number with COVID. Well, it's 18. What that means is if a infected measles person walks in, a kid, they can infect 12 to 18 other folks. And you contrast that with the flu, for example. One person walks into a room, they're likely to infect 2 or 3. And it's so infectious that it actually stays very viable when it's aerosolized. So if someone comes in with measles, and they often have an upper respiratory part of it, they start coughing, they leave the room, there can be infectious virus that's aerosolized and floating in the room for up to 2, 3, 4 hours. And so you don't even have to have the person there. If you walk in, you can be infected. And right now, it's been a real problem. If you look at the disease, 10 to 20% of kids that are infected, or people infected, end up being hospitalized. 10% develop ear infections, and that can lead to significant hearing impairment. When I was a kid growing up, there were 2 or 3 kids in the neighborhood who were actually deaf from measles. And then the last thing is about 5% get a really significant pneumonia, and that's usually the one that can lead to death. But it's a really bad disease. So the good news is that the vaccine is fantastic. It's 95% effective at preventing the disease, and very effective in the few people that even get it then at preventing serious illness and hospitalization. It is so effective, we don't have to do the experiment anymore. This is the data from, used to be in the early 60s, 500,000 cases of measles. And when the vaccine was licensed, look at it, it almost disappeared. They were down to a few hundred to a few thousand. And then in 1989, a second dose was recommended, and that got rid of the blip. And in 2000, we eliminated in the United States all internally transmitted cases of measles. So we have taken a major step backward, all because people are not getting vaccinated. So right now we've had, in 2025, looking back, there were over 2,200 cases of measles. In 2026, there are already 171 new confirmed cases, and the hot spot, of course, is in South Carolina, where cases surged by 30% last week. There were 124 new cases, bringing the state's total to 558, and it started in Spartanburg County. If you look at in 2026 so far, we have 171 cases. The majority are actually between 5 and 19 years. So this is people who have not been vaccinated. Over 95% of the vaccine status, this year's cases have been unvaccinated. 2% had 1 dose, or another 2% are under-vaccinated, and only 2% have had both vaccinations. But then they don't get seriously ill if they are infected. Last year was pretty typical. 11% in 2025 were hospitalized. So far, 1% this year, but that number will end up being 10 to 11%. And if you look at the weekly cases by onset of rash, again, it was bad enough in 25. It's surging now early in this year. Yearly measles cases since 2020 have just been steadily increasing. You can see this peak last year in 25. My guess is we'll exceed that in 26. So it was a really cool study. There was a collaboration of researchers from Boston Children's, Harvard School of Medicine, and the Icahn School of Medicine in Mount Sinai. It was published in the journal Nature Health. And what they did was they created a map that looks at vaccine status by county. And you can, even by zip code. And so this is an example where very high risk is in dark blue. You can see mostly in the south, but so the risk is based on how many people are unvaccinated. So I got to have a grandkid in North Carolina, so I popped in his zip code, and only 60% of his neighbors in that zip code are vaccinated. they are definitely susceptible for an outbreak. And so I have a grandson who's 5 months, so they're protected because of the antibodies from the mother. But what do you do at 6 months? You're not supposed to get your first vaccine till 1 year and then a second one at 4. I'm going to urge them to talk to their pediatrician about getting an early vaccine at 6 months. But, we shouldn't have to do this. This is why everybody needs to be vaccinated in the neighborhood, because it puts all young kids at risk, especially kids before the age of 1. So it's not just you, it's everybody. Well, let's talk about influenza. It's been a pretty big season this year. It's not been a terrible season. It's been a sort of typical flu season. The CDC estimates that there have been 18 million illnesses, 230,000 hospitalizations, and 9,300 deaths from flu this year. The trends for the lab positivity are beginning to go down. The vast majority, I'll show you, are H3N2. The trend for outpatient respiratory illnesses is beginning to go down. And it's fairly typical. Mortality is a late complication. You get infected, you get pneumonia down the road. If you get hospitalized, and if there's more mortality, it ends up late. The trend for mortality is up to 2% right now of hospitalized deaths. That's going up. There were 15 pediatric deaths this week for a total of 32. Over 90% of those kids were unvaccinated. And again, these are unnecessary pediatric deaths. If you look at the positive tests reported to the CDC, you can see it's finally beginning to go down. Influenza A in yellow and influenza B in green, the vast majority influenza A. If you do the genotyping, the vast majority H3N2 in red there, the orange H1N1, yellow means that they weren't genotyped. So the vast majority H3N2, and they're H3N2 of that K clade. That's the one that emerged in the southern hemisphere late, slightly different from the H3N2 in the vaccine, but so far, it's been a pretty typical season. If you look at outpatient visits for respiratory illness, this is interesting. In 2024 and last year's season, 24-25, we had a double peak. That's very unusual. Usually in the previous years, you see a single peak. It's almost always in week 52, and then it begins to come down. So at the end of the last week in the year is when there's a peak that starts coming down. I hope we don't have a double peak. We don't know yet, but if you look this year, it's been pretty typical, very single big spike, and it seems to be coming down. If you look at the percentage of ED visits that are due to diagnosed influenza, again, last year, then week 20 or year 24-25, you can see it peaked in week 52, but then we had this second peak in February of the following year in 25. So we are here in 25, and you can see it's beginning to fall, and hopefully it'll stay that way, and we won't see a resurgence. Hospitalizations followed exactly the same thing. You can see 24-25 had that double peak. 25-26 this season, it seems to be coming down. And as far as pneumonia and flu mortality, it seems to be about the same as it was in previous years. It was higher last year than in previous years, and it looks like it's about the same this year. And pediatric deaths, similar. Last year was a little higher. We'll see what happens this year. So there were a couple of studies evaluating the flu vaccine. One from Copenhagen looked at 332,000 older adults in Denmark who were vaccinated across the last 3 seasons. And what they wanted to look specifically is the high-dose vaccine better than the usual dose? And it turns out the high-dose vaccine provided enhanced protection compared to the lower dose, and particularly in patients that were also diabetic. So older patients who are diabetic should definitely get the high-dose vaccine. That's what we recommended for everybody this year, and I hope if you're over the age of 60, you got the high-dose vaccine. So one of the questions has been, why are so many kids unvaccinated? Now, some of this is kind of obvious, but these authors looked at childhood vaccine requirements for children entering kindergartens from 3,000 counties in 45 states. And what they looked at was the number of times exemptions were requested. So non-medical exemptions are granted for personal beliefs or religious beliefs. Medical exemptions are given to those people who have a documented condition where the vaccine is contraindicated. And what they showed is that non-medical exemptions really proliferated after the SARS-CoV-2 emergency, and that correlated with the decline in U.S. child vaccination. Now, that probably seems obvious. I mean, more and more people are requesting non-medical exemptions for religious or personal beliefs. But the point of the authors and what calls into question is what that means is we need to change policy. You know, it used to be a policy you can't send your kids to kindergarten without being vaccinated. Now all these states are allowing more and more non-medical exemptions. The result is we're getting fewer and fewer vaccines, and you're seeing measles outbreaks. This is a real simple solution. This should be a policy decision. You can't send your kid without being vaccinated. To me, that's a very straightforward thing. There was also there were two studies that looked at the benefits of RSV vaccine and the monoclonal antibody, just showing their efficacy. One came from Spain. They looked at giving infants the long-term monoclonal antibody before their first RSV season. Remember, for RSV, you can vaccinate the mother, and that is effective. Or if the mother hasn't been vaccinated, you can give the newborn this long-lasting monoclonal antibody during the first RSV season. It lowered respiratory infections by 86% in 23, 24, and 55%. So very, very effective. In another study in Lombardy, Italy, they looked at the benefits of RSV vaccination in older people and found a 42.7% reduction in emergency visits and a 47% reduction in hospitalization. So that, you know, it's a very effective. We have very effective means for treating RSV. Okay, all well and good, science is well and good. Now for the really hot topic of the week. This is the coolest thing I've seen. So, you know, we humans, we assess other animals in the animal kingdom, how smart they are. One of the things we look at is, are they able to use tools? So here are good examples. We know that primates use tools. Here's a chimpanzee, I think, running for office. I'm not sure what he's doing there. This is a bird using a little twig to pull out some bugs. And there's a sea otter cracking clams on a rock. I can't get into clams, frankly, so sea otters are smarter than me. But, you know, it's well known that primates such as chimpanzees, capuchin monkeys, orangutans, they use rocks and sticks and all kinds of things to, you know, fish out termites. They use rocks for hammers. Birds such as the ravens, woodpecker finches, and New Caledonian crows use wires and sticks to get insects. And sea otters and dolphins use all kinds of things to get food and to protect their snouts for dolphins. And even octopus. I don't know if you've ever seen octopus, but they'll use shells and all kinds of things. They're the only invertebrate that uses tools to help themselves. Until now. There is a cow. Where is this cow? Veronica. The Veronica cow. And you can see this if you really want to. The article has a video of it. This cow uses a broom. And this is the first example. The cow uses the bristle end of the broom to scratch its back and the stick end of the broom to rub its belly. And they did this like a bunch of times. They did it. It was a really controlled study. And the cow actually decides what to do and picks up. This is the first example of a cow using a tool. So cows might be a lot smarter than we thought. Anyway. Janet, you'll love that study. My sister uses the broomstick for other things. They usually beat people around. Anyway, so I want to end today with some shout-outs. Congratulations to Jochen Meyer, assistant professor of neurology, who's been awarded a research grant from the Rice Brain Institute and the Texas Medical Center's Neuro Collaboration Seed Grant Program. Dr. Meyer, along with co-principal investigator Jose Sloblowski at Rice, will work on testing of non-surgical approaches that focus on ultrasound to deliver gene-based therapies to prevent epilepsy. So very kind of cool thing.
He's going to take off and run. Mendoza weaves his way first and goal, diving toward the end zone. Touchdown! A century of futility is forgotten. The Indiana Hoosiers are the kings of college football.
Congratulations to my medical school, Indiana University, who won the national championship. You know, it's funny because they have an outstanding medical school. And normally when you see campuses after a national championship, people are waving around and doing bonfires. They had pictures of Bloomington, the quartets breaking out. They had the band playing. It was like classic music school response to a national championship, which is probably why they never won. Anyway, congratulations to them. And finally, of course, once a year we have a winter problem. A winter problem, we call it here. We are supposed to have a very difficult weekend. It's supposed to get cold. Take time, please, to prepare for power outages and all that kind of stuff. And the Baylor website has great information on how to prepare for this weather event. And hopefully we'll all survive this very cold weather. My friends in the north laugh at us, but that's okay. Anyway, have a wonderful, warm weekend, and I can't wait to see you all next week.